Good evening. We're going to read from the book of Daniel today and get to know a little bit about the Daniel in the Old Testament. An earthquake shakes the foundation of our security. A tornado blows away a lifetime of treasures. An assassin's bullet changes national history. A drunk driver claims an innocent victim. A divorce shatters a home. Terrorism frightens a nation. International and personal tragedies make our world a fearful place, overflowing with evil and seemingly out of control. The litany of bombings, kidnappings, shootings, and natural disasters cause us to think that God is absent or impotent. So where is God? We cry, engulfed by sorrow and despair. 25 centuries ago, Daniel could have despaired. He and thousands of his countrymen had been deported to a foreign land after Judah was conquered. Daniel found himself facing an egocentric despot and surrounded by idolaters. But instead of giving in or giving up, this courageous young man held fast to his faith in God. We're going to start now in Daniel chapter 1. That was just a little intro on Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, we start out is Daniel's training in Babylon. So we'll read the first two verses in chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim of Judah into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. And you see, born during the middle of Josiah's reign, which can be found in the 2 Kings 22 to 23, Daniel grew up during this king's reforms. During this time, Daniel probably heard the words of Jeremiah, a prophet he mentions reading in Daniel 9:2. Ezekiel also prophesied during this time. In 609 BC, Josiah was killed in a battle against Egypt, and within 4 years, the southern kingdom of Judah had returned to its evil ways. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babylonia. In September of that year, he swept into the land of Judah and surrounded Jerusalem, making Judah a vassal state. To demonstrate his dominance, Nebuchadnezzar took many of Jerusalem's most intelligent and gifted men and most beautiful women to Babylon as captives. Daniel was among this group. Nebuchadnezzar, the supreme leader of Babylonia, was feared throughout the world. When he invaded a country, their defeat was certain. After a victory, the Babylonians usually took the most talented and useful people back to their own country, leaving behind only those incapable of making a significant contribution to Babylonian society. Those who stayed could take whatever land they wanted and were required to live peacefully there. 2 Kings 24:14 has more on this. This system fostered great loyalty from conquered lands and ensured a steady supply of wise and talented people for civil service. Daniel 1, 1 through 21, we've only read the first two verses, but Daniel served as a prophet to the exiles in Babylon from 605 to 536 BC. And Nebuchadnezzar was the one world leader who decided he could get more cooperation from the people he conquered if he let them keep their gods. Their lands he took, their riches he robbed, their lives he controlled, but their idols he allowed them to worship, sometimes even worshiping them himself. Nebuchadnezzar's plan worked well, with one glaring exception. When he conquered the little nation of Judah, he met a God who demanded exclusive worship, not just his share among many gods. I will continue here with verse 3. Figure out. Now we'll stay in verse 1 and 2. Verse 2, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles of the temple. These temple of gods, these he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. So he didn't just take people; he took all their gold and everything that they owned. At certain times, God allowed his work to suffer. In this instance, the Babylonians raided the temple of God and took worship articles to the temple of a god in Babylon, the land of Shinar. This god may have been Bel, B-E-L, also called Marduk, the chief god of the Babylonians. Those who loved the Lord, though few in number, must have felt disheartened and discouraged, especially since most people were already worshiping other gods and neglecting the Lord altogether. We feel greatly alarmed when churches around the world are destroyed, a close down for financial reasons, are split by controversies, or are racked by scandals. We do not know why God allows his church to experience these calamities. But like the people who witnessed the plundering of the temples by the Babylonians, we must trust that God is in control and that he is watching over all who trust in him. When you hear of God's people going through difficult times, pray that he will bring restoration. Remember God's promise that those who love him and suffer will experience joy when he returns. Okay, verses 3 and 4. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, Ashpenaz, chief of his court of officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. See, the common language of Chaldea, or Babylonia, was Aramaic, or Syriac, Syriac, while the language of scholarship included the ancient and complicated Babylonian language. The academic program would have included mathematics, astronomy, history, science, and magic. These young men received best education in the world at the time, and they demonstrated both aptitude and discipline. Their integrity enabled them not only to survive, but also to flourish in captivity. God was at work, accomplishing his plans for them, and just as he had planned and just as He had plans for them, He has plans for you. If you are currently experiencing a new, challenging, or difficult situation, discover the gifts and abilities God has given you to flourish. And we'll continue on with verse 5. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego, or Abednego, as some people pronounce it. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. You see, Nebuchadnezzar changed the names of Daniel and his friends because he wanted to make them Babylonian. In their own eyes and in the eyes of the Babylonian people, new names would help them assimilate into the culture. Daniel means God is my judge. In Hebrew, means God is my judge in Hebrew. His name was changed to Belshazzar, meaning Bel, protect his life. Bel, also called Marduk, was the chief Babylonian god. Hananiah means the Lord shows grace. In his new name, Shadrach probably means under the command of Aku, A-K-U, the moon god. Mishael means who is like God. His new name, Meshach, probably means who is like Aku. Azariah means the Lord helps. His new name, Abednego, means servant of Nego or Nebo or Nabu, the god of learning and writing. This was the one way the king attempted to change the religious loyalty of these young men from Judah's God to the gods of Babylonia. Daniel resolved not to eat the king's food because some of it was forbidden by Jewish law, like pork, and that can be found in Leviticus 11. And perhaps partly because accepting the king's food and drink was the first step toward depending on his gifts and favors. For Daniel and his friends, keeping their own diet helped them retain their identity and beliefs as people of God. Although Daniel lived in a culture that did not honor God, he still obeyed God's laws. Daniel was determined, purposed to be devoted to principle and was committed to a course of action. When Daniel made up his mind not to defile himself, he was being true to a lifelong determination to do what was right before God and not to give in to the pressures around him. We too may be pressured to compromise our standards and live more like the unbelieving world around us, just as Daniel continued to honor and obey God in a culture that rejected his God. You can stand up for God's absolute truths as revealed in the Bible. Perhaps your work environment requires you to participate in activities or visit places that the Bible would not condone. Boldly speak with your superiors about abstaining. And remember to uphold your identity and purpose in Christ in even the most difficult circumstances. Daniel and his friends lived in a precarious situation. They were virtually slaves of a foreign, pagan, and powerful king who could easily have them killed for disobedience. First and foremost, however, they served a living, holy, and personal God who is more powerful than any king on earth. Daniel worked hard to respect the king of the land, but he was determined to be ultimately loyal to the king of the universe. Even if it meant forfeiting his earthly life, he did everything he could to serve his government until it asked him to violate his commitments to the Lord. Standing for God's truth is easier if we understand what our loyalty to God entails, well before challenges arrive. Daniel and his friends had made their decision to be faithful to the laws of God before they were faced with the king's plans, so they did not hesitate to stick by their convictions. When asked to compromise them, we will get into trouble if we have not previously determined where to draw the line. But such situations arise. Decided to say no and have your reasons for doing so. Then when temptation or challenges to your faith come, remember God's purpose for you and rely on His strength to say and do what is right. Verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord, the king who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. See, in verse 9, God moved with an unseen hand to change the heart of this Babylonian official. The strong moral conviction of these 4 young men made an impact. God promises to be with His people in times of trials and temptations. This can be found in Psalms 106:46, Isaiah 43:2-5, and 1 Corinthians 10:13. His active intervention often comes right when we take a stand for Him. Stand for God and trust Him to protect you, even in ways you may not be able to see. Anything short of complete obedience meant execution for the officials who served Nebuchadnezzar. Even in such a small matter as this, the official feared for his life. Verse 11. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. You see, the Babylonians were trying to change the thinking of the young men by giving them a Babylonian education. They were trying to change their loyalty by changing their names, and their lifestyle by changing their diet. Without compromising, Daniel found a way to live by God's standards in a culture that did not honor God. Wisely choosing to negotiate first rather than to rebel. Daniel suggested an experimental 10-day diet of vegetables plus and water instead of the royal foods and wine the king offered. With God's help, Daniel quickly thought of a practical, creative solution that saved his life and the lives of his companions. As God's people, we may adjust to our culture where possible, as long as we stay true to God's Word. You may think that Daniel is especially exceptional and that you could never think your way out of a tough spot like this. Or perhaps you don't believe that God would show you this same kind of favor. But Daniel is known as a great example of faith because he had confidence that God would help him. He trusted in God, and God acted. Do you have this kind of assurance? Trust the next time you are in a tough spot and feel tempted to compromise your faith as you put your confidence in Him to help you. Your faith will flourish, your courage will blossom, and you will become a faithful example as well. Verse, where did I leave off? 14. Verse 14. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. See, Daniel and his friends learned all they could about the new culture so they could do their work with excellence. But while they learned, they maintained steadfast allegiance to God. And God gave them skill and wisdom. Culture need not be God's enemy. If it does not violate His commands, it can aid in accomplishing His purposes. We who follow God are free to be content, to be competent leaders in our culture. But we are required to interpret culture through God's filter, not the filter of our own expediency. Nebuchadnezzar put Daniel and his friends on his staff of advisors. This staff included many magicians and astrologers. These men claimed to be able to tell the future through magic and occult practices. Sounds like a lot of things in our world today. They were masters at communicating their messages so that they sounded authoritative, as though they had come directly from their gods. In contrast, God provided Daniel and his 3 friends with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. The king was far more pleased with them than he was with his magicians and astrologers. But why? Why was he more pleased with them? Because God is the origin of all truth and was the source of the authority and wisdom of Daniel and his friends. When you counsel others, consult the Bible. You will be amazed at the fruit of the wisdom you give, because it is God's wisdom you are sharing. To survive in a foreign culture such as this, the captives had to learn how the culture operated so they could achieve excellence in the work they were given. Serve their captors well, pray for God's help, and maintain their integrity. We live in a transient world where people move between cities, states, and countries frequently, and for a variety of reasons. God placed Daniel and his friends in a position to counsel the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar in ancient Babylon, and God still works this way today. He gives his people wisdom to speak to kings, politicians, and other leaders all around the world, like Daniel. Be prepared to speak wisely to those around you. Wherever you go, if God gave Daniel and his friends the ability to adapt to and learn from the culture in which he had placed them, then he can do the same for you. Daniel was one of the first captives taken to Babylon, and he lived to see the first exiles return to Jerusalem in 538 BC. Daniel lived in Babylon for 69 years. That's 605 to 536. Throughout this time, he honored God, and God honored him. While serving as an advisor to the kings of Babylon, Daniel was God's spokesman to the Babylonian Empire. Babylonia was a wicked nation, but it would have been much worse without Daniel's influence. So that's the end of chapter 1 of the book of Daniel. And I hope to see you the next time, and we will start in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So you all have a blessed rest of your evening and have a blessed week.